All right, it's Monday, and Esther's going to start school, and Brandy has decided to continue working, even though she has a large inheritance. And Brandy loves her job, loves the people she works with, and it gives her a great amount of satisfaction. So they have a great breakfast again, and Brandy wakes up early to the aroma of fantastic breakfast. And she gets halfway to the kitchen. Esther greets her with a cup of coffee, and Brandy says, "This is fantastic coffee, best I've ever had." And Esther says, "It's Jamaican coffee. It's freshly ground, and the beans come directly from Jamaica. Mr. Ho imports them once a week from Jamaica." And they both kind of giggle about it because this has been a couple days in a row that they have gone through this discussion. It might become a pattern. And the Jamaican coffee is very good. So Esther had prepared a fantastic breakfast. She had already been up several hours. Esther had a routine of exercising in the morning and exercising in the evening before bed. This helped keep her skills sharp and at their highest level of capability. And now that the jet lag had left her and she was back to normal, she had already been up and practiced her kata from her master's instructions. And she did this in the third room, the spare room, which was empty. It was an hour-long kata, and she had done it at blazing speed. Had anybody witnessed it, they probably wouldn't have believed their eyes. And so anyway, they had a great breakfast again, and Brandy left before Esther. And as Esther left, she checked the apartment from the entranceway, looking back into it, and she just wanted to make certain what it looked like, what it should look like when she gets back home. It was a security type issue that her father had taught her. Always know what your environment is supposed to look like and then does look like. So Esther jumped on her motorcycle, took the 10-minute ride to Grant High School. Now let me make this clear. Esther had an IQ of 166. She had already accomplished much in China, and she had a higher degree certification in a couple subjects. But her father had wanted her to attend Grant High School. He and his sister had gone to Grant High School, and he thought if the opportunity came about that Esther might benefit a little bit from it. And so Esther was going to do her senior last semester at Grant High and graduate with a high school diploma, even though in China she already had a bachelor's and a master's. So she pulls into the parking lot. Parking was allowed much closer to the building for motorcycles. And as she got off her Kawasaki, a couple of young guys with Harleys that were standing by him were about to joke with her about her Kawasaki, and at that moment, 3 more Kawasaki's pulled in. It was John, her new friend, and his 2 buddies, Mike and Wes. And so they got off their bikes, and John greeted Esther very dearly and said it was so good to see her. And Esther was very pleased to see that they had traded in the Mercedes, which they had earned by helping her out earlier. And they all had a motorcycle each, a nice Kawasaki Ninja. Same as hers, a 650R. And so John said good morning to her and said, yes, we took your advice and saw your cousin. He gave us a great deal, and we've been running around all weekend enjoying the motorcycles. He said, after all, it's hard to share one car between 3 people. And so he joked because this was the point Esther had made. And so the 4 of them started for the school entrance, and everybody was being screened. They had been screening students as they entered the school for several years. They'd go through metal detectors and be screened that they weren't carrying any weapons. And on the inside, Esther told John that hopefully she'd see him later in the day, that she had to go into the office and register. And so they said goodbye, and Esther knew exactly where she was going because the school had an online map of the building and a website explaining much about the high school. So she was fairly familiar with the high school. Inside, she went to the desk and gave her name. And the receptionist said, okay, all right, Mr. Strong, the superintendent, has been waiting for you, and he asked me to bring you on in when you got here. And so she took Esther into the superintendent's office, Mr. Strong knocking on the door first, and he yelled out, come on in. And they walked in, and the receptionist said, this is Ester Saint, our newest student today. And Mr. Strong greeted her and asked her to come on in. They sat down, they had some discussion, and he questioned whether or not she had picked out a foreign language because she had put down English as a foreign language. Advanced literature in English. And Esther explained to him that she had been born and raised in China, and so English was a second language to her. So Mr. Strong felt comfortable in this, and he said, well, welcome to Grant High, and why don't you go out to the desk now and get a student's ID card. And he thanked her for coming on in and said it was a pleasure talking to her. So Esther got her ID card, a photograph, and went outside. She'd been assigned a locker on the first floor, which was for seniors. It was a very large locker, wide enough to hold her motorcycle helmet and her jacket and her backpack. And as she unloaded all this stuff into the locker, Day spotted her. Day, her new sister, her new adopted, accepted sister. And she came running up and said, "Oh, I'm so glad I found you, and I want you to meet my best friends." And she pulled Esther off several feet, and they were looking at several Gothic teenage girls. Their name was Eve and Helen and Chris with a K. And so they introduced them, and they told him, "This is my sister, and I love her dearly." Well, her best friends, they never questioned Day. They already could tell by her enthusiasm that Esther was going to be her sister. She was serious about it, and so they all gave her a hug and a kiss. I believe it was Helen, having French origins, kissed her twice on the cheek and said, "I am French, so I have to kiss you twice." So after all the hugs and hellos, they decided that they needed to start for their first class, which was on the 3rd floor of the building. He said, "Let's start walking up the stairs because I hate walking these stairs." And Esther said, "Well, I'm headed for the 3rd floor too, room 321. And so they all were amazed, and I think it was Helen that said, "Oh my gosh, wouldn't you know, we're all freaking math geniuses," because it was a class in advanced calculus. So they were walking up the stairs. I got to the 3rd floor, and there was a small crowd of students looking at some senior kind of bullying another student. And it was John, the friend of Esther that had sold her some shoes, John York. And so Esther got closer and saw it was 3 against 1. John's intimidator had a couple buddies. So Esther grabbed the 2 buddies with a hard grip on their shoulders and backed them up. And they had no way of resisting. And at about 4 feet behind, she backed them up, and she stopped and told him, "Your friend's going to have to stand on his own 2 feet on his own, separate." So their friend was pointing his finger at John and pushing it on his chest, and John York grabbed his finger and, seeing that it was now 1 against 1, and pressed his finger down to where the student went to his knees, and he told the kid, I will dress the way I want, and you need to find a way to accept others as they are. I'm not going to change the way I am, and I don't expect you to change anything about the way you are. But we need to accept each other. Can you agree to that? And John pulled his finger back a little harder. And the boy said, yes, yes, yes. And so he quickly caved in. He wasn't as tough as he was behaving originally. And so John let go of his finger. Esther came up, gave him a big hug, and said, it's so good to see you this morning. I'm glad that we got to see each other. And John said, well, I'm very impressed that you were able to remove those two friends of his. And Esther said, well, you did pretty well on your own. And John said, well, my mother told me, if you're going to be different, you'd better learn to defend yourself. And so at that, a bell rang, and that was the 6-minute bell. And everybody said, all right, we have to get to our classes before we're tardy. So that was it. Everybody went their own way. Esther said to John, hopefully we'll see you a little bit later.